Welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. This is my match reaction, my 5 takeaways from Fulham's 3-1 loss to Nottingham Forest on Tuesday night. Very disappointing loss. Could have been a lot worse, actually. And I'm going to give a lot of credit to Nottingham Forest during this show, but I'm also going to take some shots at the Fulham players, the manager Marco Silva, for a terrible performance. Let's just call it what it is. Was it better in the second half? Yes. But the damage was already done, and that actually will be one of my takeaways. Very disappointed. Was looking forward to this match all day, and then to see that from Fulham Football Club was just terrible. And I'll be sharing my thoughts in the next 10 to 15 minutes all about that. As always, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. Okay, so let's start with my number 5 takeaway. So when we talk about this match, obviously we're all very upset as Fulham supporters, and we're going to take shots at our own players and our manager like I plan on doing. But I have to start here. Nottingham Forest deserved the victory and could have won by more. That's my number 5 takeaway. So when I look at this and when I look at the goals, when I look at the way that they were set up, I have to give them credit. I can't just say we were terrible because it takes 2 to tango. I do this often when Fulham win. You have to look at why you won and why you lost and why it was a draw. In this situation, this to me had much more to do with Nottingham Forest than it did with Fulham. Fulham played into the hands of Nottingham Forest, but Nottingham Forest were very good and they deserved to win this and could have won it by more. Sometimes it happens. And obviously, I'm going to share my thoughts on why I think from a Fulham perspective, what they did wrong, but I have to give credit where credit is due. When you look at Morgan Gibbs-White, when you look at Callum Hudson-Odoi, when you look at Chris Wood, they did their job. They absolutely did their job, and they took advantage of Fulham errors, but they were also aggressive when they needed to be. They were set up beautifully to play against Fulham. Their game plan was spot on. Nuno deserves a lot of credit. That'll be coming up next because I want to talk a little bit about him. But all 3 goals were horrific to give up. Every single one of them. The first one, Sasa Lukic gets taken advantage of. The second one, I don't know why they didn't close down Chris Wood. And the third one, they just let them dictate the play to get the third goal to end the half and basically put the match done and dusted at that point. A lot of mistakes from Fulham Football Club, but the other side had to take advantage of these errors and also create these errors, and they did. So that's why, as a fan, I can't just look at this and just say Fulham were crap, embarrassing. You could say all that, and that is true, especially in the first half. But if you don't look at what Nottingham Forest did, I think you're just making an error in judgment here, because we hear this all the time when the other team just basically puts it down to their own mistakes and they don't give Fulham credit. Well, I'm going to give Nottingham Forest the credit that they deserve, and they deserve a lot. So that's why that's my number 5. Number 4, Marco was out-coached by Nuno in this match. Now, Nuno set his team up. They are very dangerous on the break. So I think it was pretty obvious that they were prepared for Fulham to have the ball, and they did have the majority of the ball. But the problem was, from a Fulham perspective, is they just could not deal with the counter, the very quick counter of Nottingham Forest. And that comes down to the manager setting his team up. And then his players have to execute, and they did beautifully. Like I mentioned, Morgan Gibbs-White ran the show. I mean, he was fantastic in this match. And a player that we talked about a lot, Callum Hudson-Odoi, was very good in this match as well. Alanga on the other side, they really hurt Fulham. And then, of course, you have Chris Wood. That mix of players really did a number. I could also talk about Nico Williams playing very well. Ola Aina playing very well. They had so many good performances, but they were set up to succeed by Nuno, and Marco went with a lineup that, listen, I didn't have an issue with, but obviously it just didn't work. And the reason that I'm going to the point where he was outcoached was, like I said, the team being able to execute their game plan. And for whatever reason, Fulham's game plan, the players didn't go out and execute it. So Marco makes a pretty stunning change around the 32nd, 33rd minute to make a triple change. So for him to do that tells me a couple of things. One, the players didn't really do their job, but two, desperation. And it shows me that his team weren't ready to go. So it does go back to Marco, but it also goes back to Nuno. I think this has more to do with Nuno setting his team up, knowing how to attack Fulham's weaknesses, especially on the wings. They just took advantage of Fulham. They took advantage of the space. They could break quickly, and attack after attack in the first half, they were dangerous. And that's why I'm going as my number 4. Marco was outcoached by Nuno. Number 3, Fulham central midfield was taken advantage by Morgan Gibbs-White and the Nottingham Forest wingers. But I just mentioned Morgan Gibbs-White. Just go back and watch this match, and you'll see how dominant he was. How bad he made Sasa Lukic and Paulinho look. And Sasa Lukic gets taken off in the 32nd or 33rd minute, and I think you can understand why. Just it was not a good performance at all from him, and then Paulinho was really not good either. So this is where everything really takes off for Nottingham Forest, because you have this player really just dictating the play, getting the ball wide, and then everything is off from that point on. I do want to mention Fulham's defense were terrible. Kenny Tete was very bad. Tosin was extremely bad. So for the goals, we can definitely look at the defense. But I think I wanted to go back and look at a little bit more in depth into the middle of the park, because I think this is where it all begins. This is where I think they really won the match, is with Morgan Gibbs-White. He was just that good, set everything up, and Fulham did not have any answers. So that's why that's my number 3. Number 2, Fulham's second half was much better, but the damage was already done in the first half. So Fulham were down 3-0 at the start of the second half, and I'm sure we're all thinking there's no way that they can come back. However, they did come back against Sheffield United. So I thought if they could get an early goal, maybe, just maybe, they could have a chance here. So they did get the early goal, the header from Tosin to make it 3-1 early in the second half. So that gives you this chance. And they were much better. They were creating opportunities. But the match was already gone at that point, because you had a team like Nottingham Forest that were already prepared to play against Fulham in this manner, that once they got the ball, they were going to break again. But they were actually very good defensively. Goes back to the coaching, goes back to the way this team was drilled. Nuno has done a very good job with Nottingham Forest. So in the second half, yes, Fulham are creating the opportunities. Could they have scored a second and potentially a third goal? Yes, but they didn't. Part of that comes down to Nottingham Forest. Part of it comes down to Fulham, but they were much better in the second half, and the changes started to work in the second half, honestly, for Fulham Football Club that Marco made. But unfortunately, I think it's pretty obvious to say it was too little too late, and it just didn't do enough to get anything for Fulham in this match. Just very disappointing all around from Fulham Football Club. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this, I was so looking forward to this. I actually targeted this match more than the Sheffield United match, because I thought Fulham had a very good chance to beating Nottingham Forest. And was I wrong? Maybe I was just looking back at how they beat them 5-0 in the first time, thinking, okay, they can beat this team at the City Ground. They should be able to do this. They absolutely should. And they were not able to. Absolutely not. And that's on Fulham because for whatever reason, they weren't good enough, but obviously Nottingham Forest were. And that's why that was my number 2. Fulham's second half was much better, but the damage was already done in the first half. Coming up next is my number 1 takeaway from this Fulham loss to Nottingham Forest. Okay, to end this quick episode of Cottage Talk, here is my number 1 takeaway, and it's simple. Fulham's opportunity to contend for Europe ended after this match. Now, I predicted that Fulham would win 7 out of their last 9. That means that they'd have to win all 7, and they're not going to do that. There's no question they're not going to do that. But I actually said they had to win these last 2 matches. They get a draw against Sheffield United, and they get a terrible loss here against Nottingham Forest. With Man City, Liverpool, West Ham, Newcastle still to come for Fulham Football Club, I don't think it's possible for them to win 7 in a row. I just don't see it. So, unfortunately, this match ended my dream of Fulham contending for Europe. They won't even be able to contend for Europe. It's done. So now it's basically, let's see how many matches that they can win. Let's see if they could upset some big clubs, which I still think that they can do. But what's really disappointing by all of this is that they had this all in front of them to do something special. And you have to ask yourself, why are they so bad on the road? And I thought it had to do with the African Cup of Nations. I was really focusing on that. Once they had a full squad, I thought they would be good to go to play on the road. And I was wrong. They are a different side away from Craven Cottage, and that is sad. You should be able to play the same way at home and away. I'm talking about performance-wise, and they simply cannot. There are some outliers. Now I can say it. Manchester United match, that's an outlier. That's not the form that they really are. They are not good on the road. And it could possibly be in some cases that we're seeing here that Fulham, when you're letting Fulham have the ball, they struggle to break down teams. For whatever reason, they do. They are more of a counterattacking team, and they struggle when they are the ones that are going to have the majority of the ball. And that is something that still surprises me, because when Fulham were in the championship, they had the ball all the time. They were able to break down teams all the time. Why can't they do that in the Premier League? They're not able to do that. So when we look at why Fulham are not going to get into Europe and say they have a great run at the end of the season, I'm going to look back at these 2 matches. I'm going to look back at the Burnley match, both Burnley matches, and say, why haven't they been able to get in Europe? This is the reason why, because they could not beat the teams like this, that when they have the ball, they struggle to break them down, and then they make a mistake and they're vulnerable. Then either they lose or they draw. They don't beat these teams. That's what's frustrating. That's ultimately why they're not going to be in Europe. Okay. Well, that's going to end this episode of Cottage Talk. As always, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. That's going to do it for this episode. My name is Russ Goldman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, part of the talkSPORT Fan Network.